Santa Fe Springs, California. A gray afternoon in February, 1962. Behind a low-speed shop, the oil derricks nod at flat brown ground. Inside, two men stand over a sports car that has no engine in it. English, beautiful, and hollow. Hand-beaten aluminum over steel tubes, and where the engine belongs, daylight. One of them is Dean Moon, whose speed shop this is. The other is a tall Texan, 39 years old, broke, with a heart bad enough that he keeps nitroglycerin tablets where his fingers can find them without looking. His name is Carroll Shelby. On the floor sits a Ford V8 built for family sedans. They set it in the hole. Somebody bends the headers by hand because nothing exists to buy. No executive from Ford standing there with a clipboard. Then it starts, and the noise coming off that thin English body is not English at all. 3.5 years later, on the 4th of July, a car descended from this one takes the world championship away from Enzo Ferrari. This is the story of the Shelby Cobra, not a rich man's toy and not a corporation with a plan. It is the story of a bankrupt Texas chicken farmer who took an out-of-date English Roadster and a cheap Ford V8 and used them to take a world championship away from the most feared name in motor racing. Along the way, he humiliated the Corvette at home, embarrassed Ferrari in Europe, and pushed the old man in Maranello out of the class he had owned for years. Carroll Shelby was born in Leesburg, Texas, in 1923. As a boy, doctors found a leaking valve in his heart and kept him indoors, a poor way to raise a child whose whole nature runs towards speed. After the war, he tried the oil fields, and in 1949, he tried chickens. The first batch of broilers cleared him about $5,000, so he put every dollar back in and went bigger. The next flock caught a disease that went through the houses like fire. By the early 1950s, Carroll Shelby was wiped out and bankrupt. That kind of ruin teaches a man that safety is an illusion and that he may as well swing. He went racing in other people's cars in the striped bib overalls from the chicken houses. In 1959, he won the 24 Hours of Le Mans in an Aston Martin. He was also dying. He raced with a nitroglycerin tablet dissolving under his tongue, which is exactly as insane as it sounds. He ran his last race in 1960 and finished second to Sterling Moss with the pills in his mouth. Then it was over. 37 years old, no career, no money, and a heart that would not let him do the one thing he was great at. In Thames Ditton, England, a small firm called AC Cars had been building cars since before the First World War. Their sports car, the Ace, had been in production since 1953 and looked every year of it. The engines it could get were small, and then Bristol stopped supplying them. A tiny English company, a 9-year-old car, and nowhere to buy an engine. Firms that size do not survive that. Meanwhile, in Maranello, Enzo Ferrari owned grand touring racing the way a landlord owns a building. His weapon was the 250 GTO, 3-liter V12, about 300 horsepower. It cost $18,000 in America, and money alone would not buy you one. You had to be approved. Personally, by Enzo Ferrari. On one side, a factory in Italy with a wall of world championships and a proprietor who decided who was allowed to give him money. On the other, a broke tire salesman from East Texas with a bad heart and a dying English car company nobody had heard of. In September 1961, Shelby wrote to Charles Hurlock, whose family owned AC Cars. The proposal was simple and on paper, absurd. Send me your chassis without engines. I will put an American V8 in them. Hurlock's alternative was to stop building cars, so he said yes, and he agreed to send them on credit because the man asking had nothing to pay with. The old firm then did something that deserves more credit than it gets. They engineered the car properly, thickening the chassis tubes and reinforcing the suspension for an engine with double the torque the frame had been drawn for. Then the whole thing went into a crate with a hole in the middle where the heart should be. If you like stories where a man with no money takes something off the richest name in racing, subscribe now and hold on to one detail. Somewhere ahead, a young designer tapes a drawing to a shop wall in California, and nearly every man in that building tells him it is ugly and wrong. That drawing is the reason Enzo Ferrari eventually quit. That solved half of it. The other half was the engine, and Shelby got the luckiest break of his life from a magazine editor. Ray Brock at Hot Rod told him Ford was finishing a new small V8, and that the thing worth knowing was not its power, but its weight. Ford had cast the block thin, and the result weighed about what a good six-cylinder weighed. The whole trick is right there, and it is not a trick at all. It is arithmetic. Drop in a V8 that weighs no more than the English 6, and you have not built a heavy car. You have built the same light car with twice the power. Ford supplied the engines, also on credit, and the prototype ran 260 cubic inches. The first car was called CSX 2000 for Carroll Shelby Experimental. It arrived in February 1962, and for 5 months it was the only Cobra on Earth. A man cannot start a car company with one car. So Shelby did something that tells you more about his mind than any lap time. He kept repainting it. Through 1962, that one automobile appeared in bare aluminum, then red, then blue, then bright yellow for the New York Auto Show. Editors tested it, photographed it, then saw a different color in another magazine, and assumed production was rolling. It was one car, one paint gun, and a Texan who never blinked. The tests were real, though, and violent. Road and Track recorded 0 to 60 miles per hour in 4.2 seconds and a top speed of 153. Nothing sold to the American public came close. The first opponent was domestic. In February 1963 at Riverside, Shelby put 2 Cobras against the new Corvette Stingray, the establishment in American club racing, and finished 1 and 2. Then they did it again the next day. By the end of that season, a Cobra had taken the SCCA National Championship in A production, none of which impressed a single person in Europe. Europe was the real business, and Ferrari had been winning there for years. The Cobra's first real test came at Le Mans in June 1963. A Roadster came home 7th overall with a class victory, but the timing sheets told a different story. On the Mulsanne Straight, the Cobra was clocked at about 167 miles per hour, and the Ferraris were faster. Not because they had more power, they had less, they had better air. A Roadster at speed is a shovel. The open cockpit and the upright windshield shove a wall of air down the road, and every mile per hour past about 140 costs, enormously more than the last. In the corners, the Cobra could beat anything Ferrari had. On the long straights, where the race is actually decided, the Italians simply pulled away. Shelby saw it. If they were ever going to do anything outside the little old circuits back in the States, he said, they had to come up with something different. It was already drawn, hanging in the shop, and nobody wanted it. Late in 1963, a young designer named Peter Brock proposed a closed coupe body on the Cobra chassis, and a particular shape for it. The tail was cut off flat. Every instinct in the room said that was wrong. Everyone knew a fast car should be a teardrop tapering to a long point behind. But Brock had been reading German aerodynamic research from the late 1930s, work associated with Wunibald cam showing that a body could be chopped off where the airflow was going to separate anyway, and the air would behave as though the tail were still there. It is correct. It is also, to eyes trained in 1963, hideous. Almost everyone in the shop opposed it, including Phil Remington, the best fabricator in the building. Ford would not fund it. There was no wind tunnel and no budget worth the name. One man backed him. Ken Miles, a former British Army tank sergeant, had seen German streamlined bodies before the war, and he understood immediately. Miles took on the engineering, stiffening the chassis to suit a roof. They built the first one in about 90 days. On the 1st of February 1964, they took it to Riverside and handed it to Miles. He broke the Cobra Roadster's lap record at that track by 3.5 seconds. That is not an improvement. That is a different category of automobile. The coupe ran around 180 miles per hour, where the Roadster ran 165, and it burned about a quarter less fuel, which in an endurance race means fewer stops. That test, Brock said afterward, changed everything. Then came Le Mans in June 1964. Down the Mulsanne Straight, in the dark, the coupe driven by Dan Gurney and Bob Bondurant was timed at over 196 miles per hour. That is the flat-tailed shape nobody wanted to build on a French public road, carrying an engine designed for family sedans. Gurney and Bondurant finished 4th overall. they won the Grand Touring class outright. They beat every Ferrari 250 GTO in the race. No American car had ever done that, not once. Still not enough. Championships are decided on points. Ferrari led going into the end of the year, and the last event on the calendar was a race at Monza that Shelby's cars looked capable of winning. It did not happen. The sanctioning came apart, and the last points went with it. Pete Brock has been blunt about it for decades. He says Enzo Ferrari had the sanctioning for that Monza race canceled, so Shelby American could not collect the points to take the title away from him. Whether the old man reached into the Italian Federation himself or whether it simply happened the way things sometimes happened when Ferrari's interests were involved is something people will argue about forever. The scoreboard is not in dispute. Ferrari, 84.6. Shelby, 78.3. 6 1/3 points, and a race that got called off. He got another year. 1965 was not close. Daytona in February, first in class. Sebring in March, first in class. Monza in April, on Ferrari's own ground, first in class. The Nürburgring, first in class again. Le Mans in June, 8th overall and top of the class. Then Reims, in the Champagne country of northeastern France. A 12-hour race on public roads, run partly in the dark, starting on the 3rd of July and finishing on the 4th. Bob Bondurant and Joe Schlesser drove the coupe. They came home 5th overall and won the Grand Touring class. And with that, on the 4th of July 1965, on French soil, the FIA World Championship for Grand Touring manufacturers belonged to Shelby American. 90 points to 71.3. It was the first world championship any American constructor had ever won in international motor racing. Not Ford, not General Motors, not Chrysler, not anyone. And it was taken by a company 3 years old. An American driver clinched it in a car drawn by an American designer, powered by an American engine on Independence Day in France. If a screenwriter handed you that, you would send it back and tell him to tone it down. Now go back to the drawing on the wall. Every bit of what just happened traces to a young man taping up a sketch in a room full of men who told him it was ugly. The Roadster could not win in Europe. The coupe could, because the tail was cut off flat, exactly as Peter Brock said it should be. The rest of the accounting happened in Italy. Enzo Ferrari, having been beaten in the Grand Touring class by a former chicken farmer, stopped contesting it. He turned to the prototype class, where his next serious opponent would be Ford itself. A louder Cobra was coming, and it is the one most Americans picture when they hear the name. Into a rebuilt frame went the 427 cubic inch Ford Big Block. Ford handed Shelby the troubled GT40 program next, and in 1966, Ford finished 1-2-3 at Le Mans. The Cobra itself simply ran out of road. Production ended in 1967. Depending on which registry you trust, and enthusiasts have argued about it for decades, the original run came to somewhere around 998 cars. Chevrolet built more Corvettes than that in a month. There was a cost, and it was not financial. On August 17, 1966, Ken Miles was killed at Riverside testing a Ford prototype. He was 47. The Englishman who believed in that flat-tailed coupe when nobody else did not live to see what any of it became. What it became eventually was money. For years, Cobras were just used sports cars sitting on back lots and in barns. Then the world caught up. In August 2016, R.M. Sotheby's rolled out CSX 2000, the car from Dean Moon's shop, the one Shelby kept for the rest of his life and never sold. With the buyer's premium, it made $13,750,000, which at that moment was the most money anyone had ever paid at public auction for an American automobile. Shelby did not live to see it. He got a new heart in 1990, and he kept putting his name on Mustangs and on chili seasoning. He died on May 10, 2012 at 89, and they buried him at Leesburg, Texas, a few miles from where the chicken houses had stood. For a certain kind of American man, none of this was ever about money. It was about standing at a fence at a road course a long time ago, hearing a Cobra come by, and thinking somebody had cheated. All that European delicacy, and then that great, ugly American thunder. It sounded like your side winning, A broke chicken farmer with a bad heart bought a dying English company's problem, filled it with an engine meant for grocery runs, and inside 4 years, took a world championship off Enzo Ferrari on the 4th of July. Nobody has done anything like it since. So settle it for me in the comments. Who really built the greatest American car ever made? A Texan in a rented shed with a borrowed engine, or somebody in Detroit with a badge in a boardroom? And if you ever stood close enough to a Cobra to feel it go by, tell me where you were standing.